Welcome to Kev's Travel Stories. Each week I'll be bringing you a story from the weird and wonderful world of travel, a world that can change the way you see life and love and even the way we find meaning. Places that are iconic and sometimes surprising and even terrifying. So sit back and enjoy while we go on a magical mystery tour together. Welcome to Kevin's Travel Stories, and this week we're going on a journey into the very depths of the ocean to a place that has no end. Yes, we're talking about the abyss. We're talking about the Sharm Sheikh Ras Mohammed National Park, one of the great diving sites of the world. And here you will find an abyss. Now, this word conjures up spooky fears in most people. It comes from the Greek abios, which means to have no bottom, fathomless. And that is exactly what myself, my son, and his best friend John encountered on a dive a few years ago in the beautiful crystal clear waters of the Great Red Sea. Let me set the scene. Ras Mohammed is regarded as one of the great natural wonders of the world. It's in Sharm el-Sheikh. It's right beside the great deserts that spread and cover that country in a glorious blanket of perfect pure sand. And here is a site that only seasoned divers are recommended to dive in, and I'll tell you why. You dive down a cliff that drops sheer into the bottom of the oceans. You cannot see the depths. So when we were dropped off by our boat, which then drifted 3 miles upstream to pick us up again, myself, Kieran, John, and our guide, and thank God we had a guide, were left on our own. We dived and we went down to 40 meters. And there, underneath our feet was, I'm not joking when I say this, nothing, dear listener. All we saw was nothing. And if you'd have let go, you'd have sunk without trace to the bottom. Now, 40 meters is very deep for a diver. If you go any further, you need different sort of tanks. You can suffer quite serious decompression sickness. So we had to take this dive very seriously. But I'll never forget that sensation of looking down and seeing the cliff behind me and the beautiful clear waters above with the boat leaving, the bubbles bursting, the sun streaming down through the clear waters. And at 40 meters it was cold, it was getting darker, and below my flippers was nothing but the cliff going down, down, down. Even as I recall it now, I get a shiver up my spine. Well, our guide, he had a little device that made a noise because water travels differently. The sounds in the water travel differently. And he gave a little click-click because John and Kieran were messing. Yes, can you believe it? You're on the top of an abyss. You're sinking. You could disappear forever. And the two lads were messing. So he put a stop to it, our instructor, and he said, come this way. So we followed him in a line. And I'll never forget it. The first thing we saw was a shoal of barracuda. Yes, they were these huge fish, and they were turning and making this DNA sort of tunnel, and we swam towards it and we watched them. Now, the barracuda can be quite vicious, so you have to be careful. And we watched them as they made this circle, as they all were in complete synchronization, and they dived below us, and we could see this funnel right down into the depths of these beautiful fish swimming and circling. Then our guide led us over to the cliffside, and here are one or two very famous things. Most famous, and I believe this is actually so funny. During the Second World War, one of the ships was sunk. One of the Allied ships was sunk. It was carrying Delft. And famously, a complete toilet seat, lodged itself on the abyss cliff. So there at 40 meters, you can sit on a toilet. I'm not joking. So, of course, we tried to take this and have a picture taken. It's all a bit naff if you ask me. But it did break the rather frightening monotony, because once you move away from the cliff, again, you're just looking down into nothing. nothingness. And it's quite a scary thing. Now, because our guide, our swim instructor, was a master swim instructor, and you'd need to be, we were actually advanced PADI divers, still am, you really need to have your wits around you, because this is quite a dangerous dive. You have to drift along. You let the currents drift along, and you look around and you see the various fish. There can be small sharks on the side of the cliff that's just on your right. So you imagine you're going along swimming. On your right is this huge rock face that has all different natural growths in it, and then some detritus from various human efforts that have come to grief, like the floundering of that particular ship. Further down, there's the Fisselgorm, which is a famous diving wreck, which is just over 40 meters. This was again sunk in the war, and you can see the remains of all sorts of what happens when a ship is waylaid. The cargo comes out, and you see human remains of what activities they were doing. It's really sort of chilling in a way. So off we went, and I'll never forget it. A couple of the times the lads had to be brought back and into good behaviour, and we went on. We had 40 minutes of air in our tanks, and we had to mind that very carefully. And as we went down, we moved away from the cliff face, right over the abyss looking down, and then we just watched. He pointed out, up here there would be a jellyfish, down here there would be a small black-tipped shark, over there you could see other shoals of fish coming and going. Some came to say hello to us because they were curious, some came back and came round our feet, our flippers. So it was an extraordinary journey, and very soon over. And then he told us to slowly go up. Now, when you've been down to 40 meters, you have to time your ascent. Otherwise, you'll get what's known as the bends, and you will die a horrible death. So we had to slowly ascend, breathing as we went, making sure that our tanks were not emptying too quickly. There's a lot when you're an advanced diver in a pretty hostile environment like the abyss at Sharm el-Sheikh. You have to be very, very careful. So the ascent has to be very, very carefully monitored, but we were in very safe hands, and it took us 10 minutes to ascend. And when we came to the surface, there were two things. The boat was there waiting for us, and there was a burst of exhilaration. Oh my goodness me, we'd done it. I can remember giving my son a high five and John a high five. The instructor, he was quite severe. He wasn't too impressed with the behaviour of the lads. I think he may have had words. But we clambered on board, took off our respirators, took off our neoprene, because remember, at 40 meters, the light starts to diminish. The pressure on the body is quite so many atmospheres, so you really are pushed down, and there's cold. It gets very cold very quick. So we took everything off and sat in the sun and recounted the tales of how some of us were a bit silly and some of us, and the wonderful sights, particularly that abiding memory of the first look down the abyss and this shoal of barracuda circling. So that is my tale of falling into the abyss. Do you have your own equivalent? Let me know, because sometimes travel can open up the most extraordinary imaginative adventures, images that will stay with you for life. And that is the joy of travel.